Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Cyrus and the rise of the Persian Empire in our continuing history of civilization. We left off with Babylon, the rise and fall of Babylon, but how did Babylon fall so quickly? And the answer is going to be in the combined kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, and how that combination took place is a story of great delight in the ancient world. The story goes that Astyages, the king of the Medes, has a dream where in his dream his daughter, Mandani, no polite way of saying this, she's urinating, and out comes all this water and it floods the city, and this is just a strange dream. And he goes to his wise men and he says, what does this mean? And they tell him, this means that from her will come forth one that will destroy the world, that will destroy your kingdom and your city. And he says, well, that can't be. And so he takes his daughter and marries her off to somebody that he's going to consider not of too great consequence. So he marries her to a Persian noble, actually going to be a Persian king, by the name of Cambyses. And there'll be other people named Cambyses as well. And so he figures, okay, I've sort of dodged the bullet, but now he has another dream, and meanwhile she's pregnant. She's pregnant with what's going to be Cyrus. There's been a few of them, so we call him Cyrus II, or he'll be Cyrus the Great. But he has another dream, and again, it's interpreted to say that child he's going to be the ruination of you. He's going to come and pull you down, Astyages. And so the story goes, as she gives birth, he takes a child, and he has the child delivered to his right-hand man, Harpagus, and with the instructions, take this child out and kill the child. Now, Harpagus, he's a little hesitant because, after all, Astyages is a bit older, and you know how grandparents can be. They might change their mind. And so he takes the child, and he gives the child to a commoner, but with those same instructions. The child's supposed to be killed. So whatever you do, don't let the child grow up. And this commoner brings the child home, and he's going to kill this child, but his wife has just given birth to a stillborn child. And his wife says, oh, why don't you take this stillborn child and pretend that one's the one you put to death. I'll take this child. It's such a lovely little child. I'll take this and raise this as our own. And they do that. And so you have little Cyrus. He's growing up now, and he's a boy. And of course they're living in and around the capital city, and one day the boys are out playing, and they're playing king, and it's Cyrus's turn to be king, and one of the other boys, who's a nobleman's son, doesn't do what Cyrus says, and so Cyrus takes a stick and beats him. And the nobleman said, well, you can't be beating my son. You're just a commoner. They're not allowed to beat a noble-born son. And somehow the story gets all the way back to Astyages, and he says, well, we can't have commoners beating up on noblemen. And little Cyrus says, well, I was playing the king, and the king has to be strong. And so Astyages says, well, wait a minute. You look a little familiar. Gee, come over here. How old are you? And Harpagus, come in here. I told you to put that son of mine to death, and I'm not going to get angry, but what happened? And now the story comes out that this is indeed Cyrus, the grandson of Astyages, and now he's not going to kill him. And so Cyrus is allowed to grow up. And as it turns out, just to see the convolutions of the story, Astyages says to Harpagus, you disobeyed me, and I don't care for that. You have a son, don't you? Oh, yes, I've got a son as well. But tell you what, I want you to come to dinner tonight. And he has that son taken, the son of Harpagus, and kills that son, and has him cooked and served on the platters of that evening's dinner. And Harpagus comes to eat at the table of the king, and when they uncover the dishes, there is his son, but he can't say anything because he's in the presence of the king. Well, the story comes back on balance when young Cyrus becomes older Cyrus, and it's Harpagus who delivers the armies into the hands of Cyrus and helps Cyrus now to overthrow his grandfather. And now Cyrus II, Cyrus the Great, he's both Persian, but his grandfather on his mother's side is Mede, and so he's going to combine these kingdoms of the Medes and the Persians. And so we have the Medes and the Persians combined. Meanwhile, you have the kingdom of Lydia, which presumably had maybe some sort of an alliance with Babylon. And Cyrus attacks Lydia. Now we're going to come back and see how that all develops. I'm just going to give you a brief story right now. He attacks Lydia, captures Lydia. And meanwhile, down in Babylon, there was Belshazzar. Belshazzar was the son of Nabonidus. Nabonidus had gone off on an archaeological expedition, sort of restoring temples. He left his son Belshazzar in charge. And Belshazzar is in Babylon, and they're going to throw a party. And he says, let's get all of the items from the temple back from when Jerusalem had been taken, Jerusalem had been burnt and destroyed. Let's take all of those golden vessels, and we're going to celebrate, and we're going to use those vessels from that old Jewish temple. And while they are celebrating, he sees the handwriting on the wall. This hand comes and begins writing a message on the wall, and the message is interpreted that this very night, Babylon's going to fall. And we read in Cyrus's story, now there's a few different variations on this. Cyrus says he came in and took the city without a fight. However, a later Greek story talks about how Cyrus diverted the waters of the Euphrates in order to march down, to sneak in the lowered riverbed and capture the city, which had been considered impregnable. The walls of the city were so great, it was said that you could turn a chariot around on top of the walls. They were that thick, hundreds, perhaps 100 feet thick. And so now Belshazzar is killed, according to the book of Daniel, and Cyrus now becomes master of the world. Daniel chapter 5 verse 31 says that Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. And that's sort of puzzling, because we know about a later Darius, but that doesn't sound like Darius the Mede. That later Darius is Darius the Persian. Who is this Darius the Mede? Several possibilities. One, that he might have been an early governor of Babylon under Cyrus. And that's possible. But considering the age, there's an interesting coincidence if that's the case, because we know that Cyrus the Great was 62 years old when he took Babylon. And it might be that Darius the Mede was just another name for Cyrus. It wasn't uncommon, remember, for kings to have a number of different names. And so that might be the answer here in Daniel chapter 5, verse 31. We read in 2 Chronicles 36:22, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom. And the proclamation was that the Jews could go back home. Now we know from the Cyrus Cylinder, discovered in 1879 by Rassam, that he issued this proclamation not just for the Jews, but for all the cultures that were under his new dominion. He says, look, those nasty old Babylonians, they were deporting people, and they were making people live in places they don't want to, and I'm the friendly conqueror. In fact, I'm not the conqueror, I'm the liberator. And so I'm here to liberate you and to save you from those nasty old Babylonians. So you go home, rebuild your temples, rebuild your cities, and be sure you send me your taxes. And this was the Cyrus Cylinder. It sort of tells us that this was the standard practice of Cyrus. Now, this brings up the question, what happened to the Ark of the Covenant? Remember that the temple had been destroyed, that some of the plates and silverware and things like that. Remember that Belshazzar is going to take out and use as his party in Babylon. But what happened to the ark? it's not mentioned after Jeremiah chapter, I think it's around chapter 5, where there's a prophecy. Jeremiah says it won't be seen again, and it hasn't. And so usually the assumption, and I think is probably right, that it was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, although some have wondered if it might not have been carried to Egypt. We actually know of a Jewish temple that was built in the area of Elephantine. We're going to talk about this later, and built there in southern Egypt at near what we call Aswan. They called it back then Elephantine Island, the island of the elephants. And we know this from some letters that we found where the Jewish people apparently it had been destroyed or damaged, and they're asking to rebuild that temple. And you wonder, well, if they had a temple, did they also have an ark? Maybe not the original, maybe just a copy. And if you go to Ethiopia today, there are those that they claim, oh yes, we have the original ark. Now I'm not sure that they do. Maybe they've got a copy. I'm not sure what they have. They won't let anyone see it or take pictures of it. So it's hard to speculate what that might be. And then there's some who think maybe the ark was hidden for protection. And there is a Jewish story that's found in one of the books of the Maccabees that talks about how it was hidden somewhere in what we call the country of Jordan, to the east of the Jordan River. But if so, it's never been found after that. Now, just to finish up with Cyrus, Cyrus eventually dies fighting far to on the east side of his empire. He's buried in a sort of a mausoleum structure, and the supposedly used to be an inscription, it's not there anymore, that said, "Passerby, I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire and was king of Asia. Grudge me not, therefore, this monument." And the monument's still there, even though the sign's not. But Cyrus, within his short span now, had conquered the entire known world, except for Greece. And we'll mention that next time as we look at that empire that's not going to last 200 years.